right before the internal photo shoot for the Sunnyvale Meadows HOA Community Directory at the Rec Center studio. She pulled me into a service corridor, hissing close to my ear. Smile. Act happy. She didn't know the cruise boom mic was still live and the secondary camera was rolling for the behind-the-scenes reel the whole neighborhood would later see. That evening, the photographer sent a text. You need to see this before it hits the main cut. The moment I pressed play, my revenge, clean, legal, and meticulously documented, began to unfold. My name is Lila Voss, 32. I am the volunteer head of HOA Communications for Sunnyvale Meadows, a position I earned through endless newsletter deadlines, sleepless nights redesigning the website, and an almost supernatural ability to spin neighbor complaints into polite community updates. And on this Tuesday morning, I was standing in the makeshift studio on the upper level of the rec center, breathing in the chemical tang of hairspray and the ghost of stale coffee from the last board meeting. The air was thick with the silent pressurized tension that precedes any high-stakes HOA performance. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the neighborhood was a sprawling grid of identical beige houses with perfect lawns and American flags at exactly the same height, indifferent and distant. Inside, it was a world of softbox lights casting sterile shadowless glows on a seamless gray backdrop. It was a place designed to erase imperfections, to manufacture a flawless suburban narrative. Place designed for lies. She moved through the room with the predatory grace of a woman who owned not just the HOA board but the very air within it. Gloria Sutter, my stepmother, HOA president for the last 6 years, and the self-appointed guardian of community harmony. Following her landslide re-election after that brutal board coup, she wore a pastel pink blazer so perfectly tailored it seemed less like fabric and more like a second, more formidable skin. Her silver blonde hair was immaculate. Her smile a carefully calibrated instrument of charm and authority. To the homeowners, she was a steady hand. To the Facebook group, she was a visionary. To the junior volunteers scurrying around the edges of the studio, she was a god whose orbit you desperately wanted to enter but feared being fined by. To me, she was a puppeteer, and I had been her prized marionette for 17 years. The photo shoot was for the annual community directory. Smiling faces meant to inspire confidence and project stability. It was my job to oversee it, to ensure the message was on brand. The lighting was flattering and the final product screamed, "We are trustworthy. We are successful. We are one big happy family." The irony was a physical weight in my chest. Lila, a word. Gloria's voice cut through the low hum of the prep work. It wasn't a request. I followed her away from the main set toward the alcove near the service elevators. The light there was dimmer, the air cooler. She didn't stop until my back was nearly against the cold metal of the door. The crew, the other board members, the makeup artist, they all became a blurred background, their attention suddenly devoted to their phones or equipment. It was a well-practiced dance of avoidance. She leaned in, her perfume a sharp, expensive scent of lavender and control flooding my senses. Her hand shot out, not to strike but to grip. Her fingers wrapped around my wrist. A gesture that could almost look maternal from a distance. But the pressure was a clear, unmistakable message. It was a reminder of her power, of the invisible leash she'd held for so long. I felt the familiar dull ache flare up in the tender tissue she'd squeezed just that morning in the privacy of our family home before we left. "Smile," she whispered. The words a puff of warm, menacing air against my ear. Her voice was a low rumble meant only for me. "The quarterly dues are soft this quarter. The board is skittish. They need to see a united front. They need to see you looking proud. Act happy." She treated me not as her stepdaughter, not as the head of communications, but as a personal PR asset, a prop to be positioned for her own benefit. Her grip tightened for a fraction of a second, a final punctuation mark on her command before she released me. She straightened her blazer, her public smile snapping back into place, and walked back toward the lights, leaving me in the relative dark. I took a slow, deliberate breath. My own performance beginning. I walked back to my mark beside her, the heat of the softbox lights feeling like an interrogation lamp. I tugged the cuff of my silk blouse down. Practiced gesture. Underneath, I knew a faint bluish shadow was already beginning to form. A mirror of the one from earlier. I'd become an expert at covering them. A little concealer, a dusting of powder, a careful arrangement of sleeves and bracelets. The lights were unforgiving, designed to reveal every flaw. Yet I had learned to hide the most important ones in plain sight. Across the room, Noah Pike, the head photographer we hired every year, adjusted a lens. He was a freelancer with a reputation for capturing the truth of his subjects. He caught my eye for a moment, his expression unreadable before turning to his assistant. "Studio quiet, please," he called out, his voice calm but firm. Then more quietly to the sound technician near him, "Keep the boom live. Don't cut audio between takes. I want to catch the candid stuff." It was a standard request for this kind of work. But today the words landed differently. They felt like a key turning in a lock. Out of the direct glare of the lights near the craft services table stood two figures from the HOA Compliance Committee, both dressed in the suburban uniform of khakis and anxious ambition. They were ostensibly here to ensure a safe and professional environment. But as Gloria had cornered me, their eyes had been glued to their glowing phone screens, thumbs scrolling with performative intensity. They were professional witnesses to nothing, their silence a form of HOA currency, paid in waived fines and willful ignorance. They were part of the architecture of the problem. Gloria took her place in the center of the frame. I stood to her right, the designated position for her most senior, most loyal-looking direct report. The camera was a great black eye, unblinking. "All right?" Big smiles, everyone. Noah directed from behind the lens. The muscle in my jaw ached as I stretched my lips into the perfect HOA smile. It was a smile I had perfected over years of board meetings, Facebook posts, and tense family dinners. It was wide enough to convey warmth but not so wide as to look manic. The corners of my eyes crinkled just so, faking a sincerity I hadn't felt in a decade. It was a mask, and it was fused to my skin. But behind the mask my mind was a machine, cold and clear. The words echoed, a quiet mantra under the relentless click and flash of the camera. Record. The secondary camera, the one capturing behind-the-scenes footage for the community sizzle reel, was positioned off to the side. Its red light, a tiny beautiful beacon. Capture. Noah's instruction to his audio tech. Keep the boom live. The microphone suspended just out of frame was a silent, impartial ear, hearing the whisper that the compliance committee had chosen to ignore. Save the raw files, the audio tracks, the metadata, time-stamped and irrefutable. A chain of evidence. Gloria placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of maternal pride for the camera. The weight of it felt like a ton of bricks. She leaned her head slightly toward mine, a perfect tableau of family synergy. "That's it," she murmured, her voice now laced with public approval. "Doesn't she have a wonderful smile?" The camera flashed, capturing the lie in stunning high-resolution clarity. I held the smile, my face a perfect picture of suburban contentment. Inside, I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. Every flash of the camera wasn't capturing an image of my submission. It was forging a weapon, and I was simply waiting for the right moment to use it. The mantra continued its steady, silent rhythm, a promise to myself in the face of the blinding lights. Record, capture, save, build the case. The flash of the camera seared a white-hot imprint onto my retinas. For a moment all I could see was the ghost of that artificial sun. Gloria's hand was still on my shoulder, a proprietary weight that felt less like support and more like an anchor. It was the same weight I'd felt at 15, sitting at the polished kitchen island in our house on Maple Lane, listening to this relative stranger explain the rules of our new life. My mother, beautiful and fragile, had just married her brother. No, wait, the story had twisted over the years until Gloria had simply absorbed us into her domain. We were in her house now, a sprawling sterile McMansion that swallowed sound and light. It was our first time hosting one of her neighborhood harmony dinners, and she had gathered us for a pre-game huddle. "Now listen," she'd said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "When they ask you about school, Lila, you tell them you love it. You talk about your debate club win. When they ask about your mother, you say how happy she is, how she's finally found her place. We are a family now. We look happy. We act happy. We don't want anyone getting the wrong impression. No long faces. No embarrassing silences." She called it coaching, a way to manage optics. Even then I understood it was training, the kind you give a dog to teach it a new unnatural trick. Don't make a mess. Don't ruin the furniture. Don't embarrass the president. My mother had just smiled, a tight nervous flicker, and patted my hand. "It's just for a little while, sweetie." But the little while never ended. It just changed venues from the dining room to the entire neighborhood. "Perfect. Lila, Gloria, that's a great shot." Noah's voice pulled me back to the rec center. I blinked, the studio reforming around me. Gloria squeezed my shoulder one last time before dropping her hand. The performance complete. I could still feel the phantom pressure. Just last month I drafted the copy for her feature in the Sunnyvale Meadows Monthly. I typed the words myself. At Sunnyvale Meadows we believe our greatest asset is our people. We've cultivated a culture of psychological safety and radical transparency. For me, it all comes back to family values. Integrity, trust, and mutual respect. A safe home and a safe neighborhood are two sides of the same coin. I remember reading it back and feeling a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of my desk. The coin she spoke of had her face on both sides. My ascent in the HOA hadn't been a gift from her. It had been a necessity. She couldn't have her stepdaughter languishing in the shadows. It wouldn't fit the narrative. But she also couldn't promote an incompetent. So I had to be better than everyone else. And I was. I armed myself with data, with results that were bulletproof. When I took over communications, our Facebook engagement was stagnant. I rebuilt the entire strategy, focusing on data-driven posts and targeted outreach. The result was a 62% increase in positive comments within 18 months. When a supply chain issue threatened to delay the new playground installation 2 quarters ago, I worked 72 hours straight building a multi-platform response that not only neutralized the negative posts but spun it into a story about community accountability. We saw complaints dip for exactly 4 hours before they rebounded stronger than before. For 3 consecutive quarters, my department had single-handedly mitigated or eliminated every significant communications crisis before it could impact the annual budget report. The numbers were undeniable. They were mine. But in the boardroom they became hers. I can still picture her at the head of the long gleaming table last month, presenting my crisis aversion report to the executive committee. She clicked through my slides, my graphs, my meticulously compiled data. When she finished, there was a ripple of impressed murmurs. Then she'd smiled, that magnanimous leader of the neighborhood smile, and said, "Excellent results. Of course, this is what happens when you have strong presidential oversight. If it weren't for my guidance and the strategic framework I put in place, the team would have been chasing its tail." She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She just absorbed my victory, my work, my sleepless nights into her own mythology as easily as breathing. The other board members nodded, accepting it as truth. Protesting would have been career suicide in this neighborhood. It would have been emotional, hysterical. It would have been not a good cultural fit. That phrase, "not a cultural fit," was her HOA scalpel. It was clean, bloodless, and brutally effective. It was how she trimmed away anyone who questioned the official narrative. A homeowner who raised flags about inflated landscaping fees was suddenly not a team player. A retiree who pointed out that Gloria's pet speed bump project was behind schedule and over budget was creating a negative atmosphere. They were quietly, efficiently managed out. Their departures announced in bland emails about pursuing other opportunities. At Sunnyvale Meadows, culture wasn't about collaboration or actual community. It was about compliance. It was about smiling for the directory and not making a scene. She ran the neighborhood exactly the way she ran our home. My mother, once a vibrant woman with a passion for gardening and a wide circle of friends, now had a social calendar curated by Gloria's executive assistant. She'd scan the invitations for block parties and fundraisers. "We'll attend this one," she'd announce. "The mayor will be there. Be charming. Wear the blue dress." She didn't ask what my mother wanted to do. She told her what role she was to play. Smile for the guests. Darling. Play the part. It was the same script, just a different stage, a different costume, the same command to perform happiness for her benefit. Took me years to see the pattern, and it cost me the only serious relationship I ever had. Mark was an architect, a man who built things that were solid and true. He saw the world in terms of blueprints and foundations, and he couldn't understand the flimsy, rotten framework of my life. "You let her walk all over you, Lila," he'd say after I'd come home drained and furious from another meeting where Gloria had stolen my post ideas. "Why don't you just confront her?" I tried to explain the insidious nature of it. The way Gloria never raised her voice in public. The way her control was woven into the very fabric of our lives, both at home and across the entire subdivision. It wasn't one single dramatic act of villainy. It was 1,000 tiny daily aggressions. It was death by $1,250 fines. One night he saw me documenting everything in a locked journal, dates, times, quotes, incidents, a meticulous log of every slight, every stolen idea, every whispered threat. He looked at the book, then at me, his face etched with sad pity. "Don't dig too deep, Lila. Some things are better left buried. This obsession is going to consume you." He left 3 weeks later. He wanted to build a life on a solid foundation, and he knew mine was sitting on a fault line. He was right. It did consume me, but it wasn't an obsession. It was a strategy. After he left, I stopped seeing it as a fight I could win with words. Arguing with Gloria was like punching water. She was fluid, formless, impossible to land a blow on. She'd twist my words, reframe my reality, and gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. I realized my mistake. I had been trying to appeal to a sense of fairness that didn't exist. I had been using the wrong language. The only language women like Gloria understood was power. The only truth they recognized was the one they couldn't deny. So I learned to be quiet. I learned to smile at the right times, to nod in the right meetings, to applaud her stolen victories. I let her think I was beaten, that I had accepted my role as a supporting character in her story. And all the while I watched, I listened, I documented. I stopped fighting her narrative and started building my own, one piece of irrefutable evidence at a time. I learned to let the machine speak for me. The timestamp on an email, the metadata on a file, the unblinking impartial red light of a camera. The photo shoot was over. The makeup artist was touching up my face for the solo portraits. As she dabbed powder under my eyes, I looked past my own reflection in her mirror and saw Noah Pike instructing his assistant to back up the B-roll camera's memory card. He wasn't just capturing posed smiles. He was capturing the space between them. And in that space the truth lived. My silence was no longer submission. It was ammunition. Victory is not won in the heat of battle. It is conceived in the sterile quiet of preparation. Months, even years before the first shot is fired. My war against Gloria Sutter did not begin in the rec center studio. It began 6 months prior in the gray twilight of my home office with a stack of vendor proposals and a single perfectly crafted paragraph. As head of communications, the RFP for Sunnyvale Meadows' primary media production contractor fell under my purview. It was a substantial 5-figure contract that drew bids from the best firms in the county. The legal department, really just Gloria's golf buddy who handled the paperwork, had provided their standard boilerplate agreement, a dense 40-page document filled with clauses on indemnification, liability, and intellectual property. I read every single word. Then I made my additions. They were small, buried deep within the technical addendums, written in the driest, most impenetrable legalese I could muster. They were designed to be overlooked, dismissed as standard operational CYA. The most important of these was Clause 9C, an innocuous-looking subsection within a larger article titled Content Integrity and Brand Representation. I called it the Moral Misrepresentation Crisis Cutover Clause. On its surface, it was a simple protective measure for the HOA. It stipulated that should any principal of Sunnyvale Meadows be captured via audio or video during a community-sanctioned recording engaging in conduct that constituted a material breach of the association's stated ethical code, including but not limited to harassment, coercion, or the creation of a hostile environment, the vendor would be contractually obligated to cede temporary control of the live or recorded content feed. That was the bait. Here was the hook. The clause further specified that the authority to trigger this crisis cutover and direct the use of the offending footage for internal review or crisis management would fall to the designated client communications lead. That was my title. That was me. It gave me, and me alone, the contractual right to take the wheel the moment Gloria showed her true face on camera. It was a poison pill and I had just written the prescription. But having a weapon is useless if you can't control it. The primary vendor, a large reputable agency, would be too risk-averse, too beholden to Gloria as president to ever honor such a clause without a protracted legal battle. I needed an accomplice, a mechanism I controlled absolutely. So I created one. 2 weeks after drafting the clause, I filed the incorporation papers for Loader Reel LLC. It was a special-purpose vehicle, an SPV, a common tool in real estate but less so in neighborhood media production. It was a shell company legally distinct with a single purpose, to handle ancillary behind-the-scenes and archival footage for community clients. It had a business address at a mail forwarding service downtown, a bank account with a minimum balance, and one sole proprietor, me, Lila Voss. When the final RFP was issued, it included a new requirement for a subvendor to manage the B-roll content, citing a new internal policy on asset archival and digital rights management. It sounded impressively bureaucratic and utterly unimportant. The winning bidder predictably didn't care who handled the B-roll as long as they were insured and competent. Loader Reel LLC was awarded the subcontract. I signed the approval paperwork myself. The next phase was building the cage. This couldn't just be a video. It had to be an artifact, a piece of evidence so forensically pure it could never be challenged. I worked with Noah Pike, whom I brought in as Loader's consulting cinematographer, to establish a chain of custody protocol that would stand up in small claims court or even county mediation. Every memory card was logged upon entry and exit. Every file transfer was executed using software that performed a cryptographic checksum, generating a unique digital fingerprint, an MD5 hash for the raw file. If a single pixel was altered, the hash would change. The original camera files with their rich, unalterable metadata, camera model, lens, aperture, and the all-important embedded timecode were to be immediately duplicated to an encrypted air-gapped hard drive. There would be no room for Gloria's lawyers to cry deepfake or selective editing. The data would be the testimony. The numbers would be the witness. Then came the insurance. I used Loader's operating budget to purchase a comprehensive errors and omissions policy. This is standard practice protecting against negligence or failure to perform. But I went a step further. I paid an additional premium for a custom rider, a specific addition to the policy. It explicitly covered legal costs and damages arising from the release of footage under a moral breach or crisis cut clause in a client contract. An insurance policy is a business document. An underwriter had now assessed the risk of my specific clause and assigned it a dollar value. The trap was no longer just a private scheme. It was a legally recognized, insured commercial possibility. It was real. The final piece was the subtlest. Tucked into the production services appendix, which detailed technical specifications like lighting and audio formats, was a single sentence. For the purposes of ensuring continuity and capturing authentic moments of community culture, all secondary cameras, B-roll, and auxiliary microphones are to record continuously throughout the designated production schedule, unless a cessation is requested in writing by the client communications lead. No one in the HOA legal department read it closely. Why would they? They were focused on the five-figure liability of the main contract. They scanned the addendums for budget implications and intellectual property claims. A sentence about when to press the stop record button on a secondary camera? It was operational minutiae, irrelevant noise. They missed the nuance. The clause didn't say the camera would roll between takes. It said it would roll continuously. It made Noah's decision to keep the boom mic live not an accident or a moment of creative inspiration, but a fulfillment of his contractual duty. And it gave me, the comms lead, the sole documented authority to make it stop. My silence was by legal definition an order to continue recording. The beauty of the trap was its mundane architecture. It wasn't a conspiracy whispered in shadows. It was a series of fully executed, legally sound, and utterly boring business documents. It was built from the very tools of the suburban world Gloria revered: contracts, shell corporations, insurance policies, and the crushing weight of fine print that no one ever has the time or inclination to read. She and her entire board had signed off on the blueprints for their own destruction. They had been so focused on the gleaming facade of the main production that they never bothered to inspect the foundations. They never noticed the load-bearing walls were made of paper, and the emergency exits all led to a room where I held the only key. The trap wasn't in the closet itself. It was in the parentheses, the subsections, the appendices. It was in the assumption that the behind-the-scenes reel was just that, behind the scenes, an afterthought fluff. They forgot that, in communications, the real story is never what happens when the main camera is rolling. It's what happens in the moments just before and just after. It's what's whispered when you think no one is listening. The rest of the photo shoot passed in a state of hyper-aware dissociation. I smiled. I tilted my head. I projected an aura of competent, approachable leadership. Every instruction Noah gave I followed with practiced ease. But my mind was elsewhere, running calculations, reviewing timelines, and rehearsing a script no one else could hear. The ache in my wrist was a dull rhythmic pulse, a physical metronome counting down the seconds to the next phase of my plan. I was in my home office late that evening, the neighborhood streetlights beginning to glitter against the deep cobalt of the sky when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from a number I knew but didn't have saved. It was Noah. Check your secure portal. Project B-roll dailies. That was all. My heart, which had been beating with a steady, controlled rhythm all afternoon, gave a single hard thud against my ribs. I swiveled in my chair, turning away from the window and its deceptive beauty. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dim office. I navigated to the encrypted server we had established for Loader Reel LLC, a digital fortress accessible only by a multi-factor authentication process that felt like unlocking a bank vault. In the project folder there was a single new file. The name was a string of cold data, a digital catalog number that was in itself a piece of evidence. TMBB0416 of underscore camera underscore April underscore 16 th underscore motion underscore picture underscore file. Beside it, the metadata was listed in a neat column. A digital birth certificate for this moment in time. File size 2.7 gigabytes. Codec Apple ProRes 422. And the crucial one, Creation date time 10:07 and 3 seconds AM. My hand trembled slightly as I moved the cursor over the file and clicked play. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, not to hear better but to ensure that the sound of this moment would be for me alone. The video player opened. The screen was black for a second, then it flickered to life. The first few seconds were mundane. A shot of the assistant adjusting a C-stand. The muffled sound of footsteps on the concrete floor, someone coughing off camera. It was the visual detritus of a professional shoot. The sound was raw, unmixed. The boom microphone picked up everything, the hum of the HVAC system, the distant lawnmower from the street below, the rustle of clothing. It was the sound of an unedited reality. Then the frame shifted as the camera operator panned to follow movement. I saw my own back, the line of my shoulders tense. I saw Gloria step into the frame, her movements sharp, purposeful. The camera zoomed slightly, tightening the shot as if the operator sensed a moment of significance. I watched, a detached observer to my own life, as she led me into the alcove by the service elevator. The visual was damning enough. The way she cornered me, the invasion of my personal space, the subtle aggression in her posture. But the audio was the soul of the thing. The ambient hum of the studio suddenly became the background to a much more intimate, much more sinister soundscape. I heard the distinct rustle of her blazer sleeve against my silk blouse. It was followed by a soft percussive sound. The sound of her fingers wrapping around my wrist. The pressure just enough to make the fabric constrict. And then her voice on the recording, stripped of the room's echo and the distracting chatter. It was a revelation. It wasn't loud. It was a low, concentrated hiss imbued with a kind of casual cruelty that was far more chilling than a shout would have been. Smile. Act happy. The words were perfectly clear, each consonant sharp and distinct. It was not a suggestion. It was not a piece of advice. It was a command delivered with the absolute certainty of a president to a subordinate. The microphone was so sensitive it picked up the next sound. A sound I hadn't even been aware of making. It was a tiny, sharp intake of breath through my teeth. A hiss. It was the involuntary sound of pain, of surprise, of a boundary being crossed. It was less than half a second long, but on the recording it was a spike in the waveform, a sonic testament to the pressure of her grip. An audio footprint of the bruise that was now forming under my skin. The video played on for another 10 seconds, showing her release me and walk away, her public persona snapping back into place like a mask. The camera operator, sensing the moment was over, panned away. I watched the end of the clip, then hit pause. The image of her back retreating into the light was frozen on my screen. The silence in my headphones was deafening. I sat there for a full minute, not moving, just breathing. Then I picked up my phone and called Noah. He answered on the first ring. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice low. "I saw it," I said, my own voice steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of traffic on his end. "Look, Lila," he said, and the shift from professional contractor to something else was palpable. "These things happen. Sometimes the camera catches things it shouldn't. It's just a file. A few clicks and it could disappear. No one would ever know. I can wipe the server, reformat the card. It would be gone." This was the moment, the final, most important test. He was offering me an out, but he was also offering me his allegiance. Depending on my answer, he was asking me what this was really about. "No," I said, the word coming out as cold and hard as a piece of steel. "Absolutely not. Do not delete anything. I want you to proceed exactly as we discussed." "You're sure?" "I am 100% sure," I said, my voice dropping into the clinical authoritative tone of the comms lead. "Maintain the chain of custody, log the file transfer, run the MD5 hash, and send me the checksum for my records." Duplicate the raw file from the original card to the offline archive drive. I want the original card sealed in an anti-static bag, labeled, and placed in the safe until I call for it. Everything as per the loader protocol. There was another silence, shorter this time. When he spoke again, the hesitation was gone, replaced by a quiet professionalism that was absolute. Understood, he said. Checksum will be in your inbox in 5 minutes. The original is being locked down now. Thank you, Noah. You're a professional. Just doing my job. Lila, he replied. And we both knew he meant more than that. I hung up. I thought back to the moment right after the incident in the hallway. I had walked back onto the set, the heat of the lights on my skin. Gloria was already posing, laughing with one of the compliance reps. I had to compose my face to stretch my aching muscles back into that HOA-approved smile for my solo portraits. Click. Flash. Hold it. Click. Flash. With every burst of light, I wasn't just posing. I was arranging the final pieces on the chessboard. Activate legal. Notify vendor. Prepare internal brief. Time it to the annual meeting live stream. The sequence was clear in my head. A crisis communications plan for a crisis only I knew was coming. True to his word. 5 minutes later, an email arrived with a long alphanumeric string. The file's digital fingerprint. A few minutes after that, my phone buzzed again. A link to a new file on the secure server. This one was named kmbb0416_proxy.mov. I opened it. It was the same clip, but now a faint translucent watermark was burned into the image. Loader Real LLC. For review only. It was perfect. The official-looking proxy for distribution, while the pristine unwatermarked original, the evidentiary master, was now locked away in a digital and physical vault. A sleeping giant waiting for my command to wake. My work for the night was done. The evidence was secured. The protocols were followed. The co-conspirator was confirmed. I closed my laptop. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the neighborhood grid of lights. It looked like a circuit board, a network of power, a system, and I had just found the master switch. I pulled out my phone one last time. I didn't hesitate. I opened my calendar, navigated to the next week, and created a new appointment. 7:30 a.m. Location: County Mediation Center. Title: Consultation. Attendee: Anna Sharma. Esq. I had found Ms. Sharma 3 months ago. Her specialty wasn't just HOA law. It was HOA warfare. Anya Sharma's office on the second floor of the county building was a study in controlled minimalism: glass, chrome, and a single dramatic orchid. There was no clutter, no personal effects, nothing to distract from the sharp, analytical mind of the woman who sat opposite me. She slid the tablet back across the polished table, her movements precise. She had spent the last 30 minutes reviewing the media contract, the Loader LLC incorporation documents, and the watermarked video file. Her face, framed by a severe black haircut, had remained impassive. The contract is an iron box. Ms. Voss, she said, her voice as crisp as a new banknote. And Gloria Sutter's legal team handed you the rivets and the hammer. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the tablet. Clause 9C is clean. The subvendor arrangement is unconventional but legally sound. The continuous recording addendum is your shield. She leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes locking onto mine. But the most brilliant part of this is the context. You did not capture a private conversation. This was not a violation of her privacy. This was a corporate, no, community officer, the HOA president, issuing a directive to a subordinate, her communications lead, on association property during an association-sanctioned event being documented by an association-contracted vendor. She paused, letting the weight of each phrase land. When she said, "Act happy," on that recording she wasn't your stepmother. She was your president. The footage is not a family drama. It is an official community record of misconduct. You haven't just caught her. You've made Sunnyvale Meadows her accomplice. The validation was like a sip of ice water. It wasn't emotional. It was structural. My foundation was sound. So when I activate the clause, I stated more than asked. It's not a personal act of revenge. Legally, Anya clarified, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It is the contractually stipulated action of a designated client lead responding to a material breach. It is a textbook crisis management maneuver. What you choose to feel about it is your own business. I left her office and returned to the sterile quiet of my home office. The war room was no longer a metaphor. It was my desk, a clean expanse of dark wood and glowing screens. It was time to curate the exhibition. I began by drafting the central artifact, the incident brief. It was a document stripped of all humanity on purpose. I designed it to be as cold and irrefutable as a coroner's report. Sunnyvale Meadows HOA Internal Incident Brief. Event ID M0416. Date time April 16th, 10:07 and 3 seconds a.m. 10:07 and 18 seconds a.m. Location Rec Center. Studio B Service Alcove. Personnel involved: Gloria Sutter, HOA President; Lila Voss, Head of Community Communications. Event type: potential violation of Sunnyvale Meadows Code of Conduct. Section February 4th, 14 Community Integrity and Respect. I didn't write. She grabbed my wrist and threatened me. I wrote. Sequence of events. 10 hours 7 minutes and 4 seconds. G. Sutter initiates physical contact. Gripping L. Voss's left wrist. 10 hours 7 minutes and 8 seconds. G. Sutter delivers verbal directive in close proximity. 10 hours 7 minutes and 11 seconds. Audible distress vocalization from L. Voss is recorded. 10 hours 7 minutes and 15 seconds. G. Sutter releases physical contact and exits the immediate area. Below the sequence, I inserted the transcript formatted like a screenplay. Verbatim transcript audio source. Boom mic. Gloria Sutter, low, forceful smile. Act happy. The final element was a screenshot of the audio file in an editing program. It showed the waveform for her words. 2 sharp, jagged peaks followed by the tiny needle-like spike of my own stifled gasp. It was a picture of a sound, a photograph of a moment of coercion. The brief was 1 page long. Contained no analysis, no accusation, no emotion. It was just data. It was perfect. With the brief saved as a password-protected PDF, I opened my email. It was time to arm the device. I composed a new message to the primary media vendor's account manager, a man named David Chin. The subject line was bland. Contractual notice, ref. Agreement HSC 77B4. The body was even drier. David, this email serves as a formal notice per Clause 9C of our active agreement. A potential moral misrepresentation event involving a Sunnyvale Meadows principal has been recorded and documented by the designated subvendor Loader Reel LLC. Please place your team on standby to execute a crisis cutover for all live and pre-recorded content feeds upon my direct instruction. Further details are forthcoming. Regards, Lila Voss, Head of Community Communications, Sunnyvale Meadows HOA. I hit send. A digital pin had just been pulled. David would have no idea what it meant, but he would forward it to his legal team who would read Clause 9C and instruct him to do exactly what I said, lest they be found in breach of their 5-figure contract. The next step was choosing the stage. And there was only one choice. Sunnyvale Meadows' annual general meeting was next week. It was the holiest day on the neighborhood calendar. A live-streamed event on the community Facebook page and local cable channel where Gloria, as president, would present her vision for the future to hundreds of homeowners, investors in the surrounding developments, and the occasional journalist. The feed was watched in real time by everyone who mattered. It was Gloria's biggest stage, her moment of maximum exposure. It would be her gallows. I pulled up the technical schedule for the live stream. As I expected, there was a 10-second pre-roll video slated to play just before Gloria took the stage. Its title was Our Culture of Harmony. It was a montage of smiling residents and inspiring quotes about integrity. The irony was suffocating. This was my entry point. I opened the internal IT ticketing system and filed a new request. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic camouflage. Ticket 8810531. User L. VAS. Communications request type. Digital asset update. Priority medium. Description. Per President's Directive for Annual Meeting Live Stream. Project IDK 4881. Please update the asset for pre-roll slot 2A. The new asset will be pushed live from the vendor's designated crisis feed, replacing asset 77B for Culture of Harmony. Please configure the slot to accept a real-time external trigger from the comms leads console. This is to allow for last-minute updates to branding material. To the overworked IT volunteer who would receive this, it would look like one of 1,000 tedious last-minute requests. Update asset. External trigger. Branding material. It was the right jargon to induce a state of complete disinterest. He would click a few boxes, reroute the feed, and move on with his day, never knowing he had just wired the explosives. My plan was laid out, a series of cold logical steps. Yet I am human. The rage and the fear were a low hum beneath the surface of my calm. I knew that in the heat of the moment emotion would be my enemy. So I did one last thing. I opened a blank document and typed out a short memo. I printed it and placed it on the corner of my desk where only I could see it. It was a restraining order against myself. Memo to L. VAS. From L. VAS. Annual Meeting Protocol. Adhere strictly to the legal framework. Do not deviate. Do not engage in verbal altercations. Your evidence is your statement. Present the incident brief without commentary. The facts are sufficient. This is not about your pain. This is about her breach of contract and community policy. Let the machine you built do its work. I read it twice. It was my anchor. This was not a soap opera. It was a demolition, controlled one. Finally, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared and my office was cast in the artificial glow of the neighborhood streetlights, I picked up my personal phone. I scrolled to the contact labeled Mom. My finger hovered over the screen. For 17 years I had played my part. I had smiled for the guests. I had acted happy. That performance was over. I typed a single short sentence. I'm not going to pretend to be happy anymore. I hit send. Then I turned off the phone and placed it face down on the desk. There was nothing more to say. There was only action left. The air in the Sunnyvale Meadows Community Hall was cold. A deliberate manufactured chill designed to keep 200 homeowners in golf shirts awake and alert. It tasted of money and recycled AC. From my vantage point in the glass-walled content coordination booth at the back of the auditorium, the audience was a sprawling sea of khakis and polo shirts, a monochrome ocean of suburban capital. Their faces, upturned and expectant, were illuminated by the cool steel-blue LED light that washed over the stage, slicing through the manufactured twilight of the hall. A low synthesized thrum, the meeting's opening music, vibrated through the floor. A soundscape engineered to evoke feelings of power, harmony, and inevitable forward momentum. It was supposed to sound inspiring, but to me it felt like a corporate heartbeat, steady and inhuman. On the massive 40-foot screen that served as the stage's backdrop, the Sunnyvale Meadows HOA logo rotated slowly in a field of digital stars. Then the music swelled to a crescendo. The lights brightened and she walked out from the wings. Gloria Sutter. She didn't walk. She glided to the center stage lectern with the frictionless confidence of a woman who believed the neighborhood was designed for her comfort. The applause was a wave of sound, polite but forceful. She smiled, a perfectly calibrated expression of humility and command, and rested her hands on the sides of the lectern. The blazer was immaculate. The silver blonde hair glowed like a halo under the spotlights, and the voice, when it came, was a marvel of acoustic engineering. It was the voice she'd spent decades perfecting, deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of any authentic emotion. It was a voice buffed to a high gloss. "Thank you," she began, letting the sound of her own gratitude echo for a moment. "Thank you. What a year it has been for Sunnyvale Meadows. A year of transition, a year of challenge, and a year of unprecedented opportunity." She was selling a future as pristine and artificial as the stage she stood upon. I wasn't watching her. I was watching my monitors. I sat in my high-back chair, a sniper in my nest. The world reduced to two inputs: the images on my screens and the filtered clinical sound in my headset. One monitor showed the live feed of Gloria. Another showed the program output, the broadcast going out to the entire neighborhood. A third displayed my private console, the nexus of my entire operation. In the top right corner of that screen, a small three-word phrase in a simple sans-serif font was blinking: "Cut over armed." It didn't flash with frantic urgency. It pulsed a calm, steady rhythm. On, off, on, off. A digital pulse counting down to a moment only I could choose. I had spent the past week running drills with Noah and the primary vendor's technical director, ensuring the system was flawless, the pathways clear, the triggers responsive. I felt no nerves, only a profound and chilling clarity. My own heart was a steady cold drum against my ribs, a counterpoint to the synthetic beat still faintly audible from the hall. My fingers traced an invisible line on my console, mentally checking the chain of command one last time. It was a circuit of power I had designed, built from the scraps of legal boilerplate and community procedure. First, my authority, the comms lead, the contractually designated trigger. That authority flowed to the primary media vendor, a faceless legal entity now bound by Clause 9C to obey my command without question, their financial survival depending on their compliance. From them, the command would route to the subvendor Loader Reel LLC, my instrument, to Noah Pike, the trusted hand who held the asset, and Noah's command would unlock the asset locker, the encrypted digital vault where KMBB0416.MOV was sleeping. It was a four-step cascade, a domino line that would take less than half a second to complete. Clean, efficient, irreversible. A new message popped into my secure chat window. A small, unobtrusive box on my fourth monitor. It was a single word from Noah, who was patched into the vendor's remote network from his own studio across town. "Ready?" I didn't reply. He knew I was. Gloria continued her speech, her voice painting a grand narrative of synergy and homeowner value. She spoke of the recent board election not as the brutal soul-crushing power grab it had been, but as a marriage of two great neighborhood visions. She spoke of the subsequent fines and forced compliance not as the lives and peace of mind of hundreds of residents being extinguished, but as optimizing efficiencies to unlock future harmony. She was a master weaver of HOA euphemisms, a high priestess of a religion where the only sin was a bad quarterly dues report. Another ping, this one from the internal HOA messaging app. The icon for Margaret, a senior manager on the compliance committee, popped up. Her avatar was a picture of a golden retriever. "Hey Lila, all going smoothly on your end. Great turnout. Just confirming the culture video is set for after Chapter 2 as planned." My fingers moved to the keyboard, my eyes never leaving the monitors. "Yes, Margaret," I typed. "Everything is proceeding as planned. We'll be focusing on culture." I hit send. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The obliviousness of it all was breathtaking. The very people tasked with protecting residents were cheerleading from the sidelines while the rot festered in the president's chair. They were about to get a masterclass in community culture whether they wanted it or not. On stage, Gloria was moving toward her crescendo. She was talking about the foundation of the neighborhood, the bedrock upon which all their success was built. I could feel it coming. The lie, the grand all-encompassing lie that held the entire rotten structure together, the one I had heard her practice at dinners, at press conferences, and in the mirror. My breathing was even, my posture straight. I placed my right hand on the mouse, my index finger resting lightly on the left button, which was mapped to the single command: execute cutover 9C. But none of this, Gloria boomed, her voice swelling with feigned passion, her arms opening wide as if to embrace the entire room, the entire subdivision. None of our property values, none of our amenities would mean a thing if we didn't have a foundation of trust. If we didn't, in our very DNA, cherish our people. She paused for effect, letting the lie hang in the air, thick and sweet like poison. The audience was rapt. They leaned forward. The cameras tightened on her sincere, confident face. I waited. She wasn't finished. The trap was set, but the prey had to walk into it completely. Here at Sunnyvale Meadows, she continued, her voice dropping to a confidential, earnest tone, we believe in a simple, powerful truth. I moved the cursor, positioning it perfectly over the execute button on my screen. I took one final steadying breath. This was it. The next lie would be her last. She leaned into the microphone, her face a mask of profound sincerity. The entire hall, all 200 souls and the untold property values they represented, held a collective breath, waiting for the gospel from their president. At Sunnyvale Meadows, Gloria Sutter declared, her voice resonating with a carefully rehearsed gravitas that filled every corner of the vast space. Safety and respect are not just policies. They are not just words in a manual. They are our DNA. The lie was told. The trap was sprung. My finger, which had been resting on the mouse, depressed. The click was imperceptible to anyone but me. A tiny definitive sound swallowed by the vastness of the hall. On my console, a line of code executed. A digital nerve firing from my booth through the building servers out to the vendor's network and back again. Cutover 9C load. Cam B0416. Move segment 10 hours 7 minutes and 4 seconds to 10 hours 7 minutes and 18 seconds. The command was absolute. The machine I had built began to work. For 0.3 seconds the world ended. The massive 40-foot screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a serene rotating image of the Sunnyvale Meadows logo, went completely and utterly black. It was a void, a sudden shocking absence of light and information that sucked the air out of the room. 200 people blinked in unison. A low murmur, a sound of confusion, began to ripple through the front rows. Gloria herself paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face, assuming a minor technical glitch. Then the void was filled. The image that slammed onto the screen was not the polished, color-corrected community world of the presentation. It was raw, grainy, and brutally intimate. It was the drab gray wall of the service corridor alcove on the upper level shot from a slightly low angle by the B-roll camera. The frame was dominated by two figures, her back clad in the same pastel blazer she was wearing now in my profile. And then came the sound, not through the filtered, equalized lectern microphone but the raw, uncompressed audio from the boom. It was a sound that had no place in this cathedral of suburbia. It was the sound of a hand gripping a wrist, a harsh rustle of fabric, and her voice. Smile. Act happy. The words were not a broadcast. They were an injection. Her low, menacing whisper meant for an audience of one was now amplified with perfect, terrifying clarity through a $1 million sound system, delivered into the ears of every homeowner, every board member, every journalist in the room. It was an intimate threat made universally public. For a moment there was nothing, just her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. The Gloria on stage was frozen, her mouth slightly agape, a perfect statue of disbelief. The image of her back on the screen seemed to mock her live presence. A ghost of her true self haunting her in real time. Then the final piece of the audio track played. The tiny sharp hiss of my own intake of breath. A sound of pain so small and so private now rendered immense in the dead silence of the hall. It was as loud as a scream. The 14-second clip ended. The screen went black again. A final brutal punctuation. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It was heavier than sound. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of shock and comprehension. The murmur from before was gone, replaced by an absolute stunned stillness. No one coughed. No one shifted in their seat. 200 people had collectively forgotten how to breathe. I watched the hall from my glass cage. I saw the first movements like animals cautiously emerging after a seismic shock. 2 uniformed security guards near the stage exchanged a glance, their hands instinctively moving toward their radios, their professional calm shattered by a crisis they had no protocol for. My eyes shifted to the front row to the reserved section for the HOA executive team. Arthur Vance, the association's general counsel, was a man I knew to be preternaturally calm, a 65-year-old pillar of suburban law who had seen everything. His head did not snap toward the screen. It turned slowly and deliberately away from the stage. His gaze traveled across the sea of stunned faces until it found my booth at the back of the hall. Our eyes met through the glass. There was no anger in his expression. There was no confusion. There was only the cold, hard light of immediate and total understanding. He knew this was not an accident. He knew this was an execution. He then looked at the empty leather-backed chair beside him, the one reserved for the president, a seat Gloria should have taken after her speech, a seat that was now a symbol of suddenly vaporized authority. It was time. Before Arthur could even think to rise, I was already moving. I picked up the single pristine copy of the incident brief I had printed that morning. I opened the door of the booth and stepped out. The ambient sound of the hall rushed in. A low hum of 200 people collectively processing what they had just seen. My heels made a sharp, distinct clicking sound on the polished concrete floor as I walked down the side aisle toward the front row. No one looked at me. Every eye was still glued to the black screen, as if expecting or dreading what might come next. I reached the front row and stopped directly in front of Arthur Vance. He looked up at me, his face a stony mask. I did not say a word. I simply extended the one-page document to him. He took it, his eyes scanning the header. I leaned in just enough to be heard by him alone, my voice low and steady. Clause 9C of the Active Media Agreement, I said, my finger tapping the specific paragraph on the page. The chain of evidence, including checksum verification and the original unedited file, is held by the designated subvendor. It is clean. He read the single page. I watched his eyes move, taking in the time codes, the transcript, the waveform image. He was not just reading a document. He was watching his association's 6-figure liability manifest on a piece of paper. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Behind me, my headset, which was still connected via a wireless link, crackled to life. It was the vendor's technical director. His voice a panicked whisper. Control. This is vendor. We are confirming a forced cutover on the primary feed. Server logs show the command was initiated by the client-side console user idl.vas at 10:48 and 17 seconds AM. We are standing by. Please advise. His words were a distant echo. The real event was here in the silence between me and the general counsel. Arthur Vance folded the paper precisely in half. He did not look at Gloria, who was still standing at the lectern like a woman who had just been publicly electrocuted. He looked only at me. Wait in your booth, Ms. Voss, he said. It was not a request. It was the first order in a new world. I nodded once. I turned and walked back up the aisle, the same measured clicks of my heels marking my retreat. As I walked, the silence in the hall finally broke. It wasn't a shout but a deep rumbling wave of 200 people all starting to talk at once. The sound of a neighborhood beginning to price in a catastrophe. I returned to my chair in the glass booth. I sat down, straightened my back, and placed my hands on my desk. I looked out at the chaos I had unleashed. The security guards were now closing in on the stage. Arthur Vance was speaking into his phone, his expression grim. Gloria was being quietly but firmly escorted away from the lectern by 2 board members. I had built the weapon. I had chosen the time. I had pulled the trigger. Now I would simply sit. I would not apologize. I would not explain. My work was done. The facts would do the rest. The world outside my glass booth had dissolved into chaos. But inside it was a command center. The storm had hit and I was its eye. My monitors, which moments ago had shown a polished community presentation, were now a frantic dashboard of the immediate aftermath. The first wave of the ripple effect was not a sound but a cascade of digital alerts. The global livestream feed, which I could see on monitor 2, flickered from the black screen to a static slate. The Sunnyvale Meadows annual meeting broadcast is currently experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. It wasn't a difficulty. It was a deliberate, controlled demolition. On my headset, I could hear the vendor's director frantically trying to manage the dead air, but his instructions were irrelevant. I had the kill switch. Simultaneously, a new window popped up on my primary screen. It was my neighborhood news feed set to alert on any mention of Sunnyvale Meadows. The alert was stark, written in the brutal, emotionless language of the suburbs. 10:51 a.m. Community Facebook group exploding. Gloria Sutter hot mic, incident trending locally. Meeting paused. Residents demanding answers. 15 minutes for the association to provide an explanation for an event that was by design inexplicable. My HOA email, which I had kept minimized, was now a blur. The preview pane showed a frantic, unending stream of new messages. The subject lines a chorus of panic. Urgent, live stream. What the hell is happening? Call me now. I ignored them all. They were the noise of the old world dying. The only communication that mattered came through a secure channel from Arthur Vance's office. It was not an email. It was a formal notification. The independent members of the board of directors have called an immediate executive session. Ms. Sutter has been asked to attend. Her microphone and network access have been suspended pending the session's outcome. The language was precise, clinical. Gloria was no longer president. She was a subject. She was no longer on stage. She was being called to account. My own next steps were equally precise. I initiated a new internal event protocol, the one reserved for the most severe community crisis. On the internal legal server, I created a new file vault. Its name was the same as the incident brief, M0416 Moral Event April 16th. Into this digital safe I began the transfer. First the incident brief itself, then the watermarked proxy video, then the high-resolution still images of the waveform. I sent a single encrypted email to Noah. Subject: Asset Transfer. Deliver original source file cam B0416.mov and camera card serial B779C4 to Sunnyvale Meadows Legal Vault care of Arthur Vance. His reply was instantaneous. En route. The system I had built was now feeding itself. An automated notification pinged me. The creation of M0416 had triggered a mandatory preliminary review by both compliance and digital forensics. Margaret, the compliance manager with the golden retriever avatar, was the first to react. Her panicked message was a stark contrast to her earlier cheerfulness. Lila, my team is reviewing the clip. This has to be some kind of malicious edit, a deepfake. It's the only explanation. We are launching a full forensic analysis to prove it's been manipulated. She was following her playbook, the one that always started with denial. It was a flimsy shield against a nuclear blast. Before I could even formulate a reply, a new message appeared in the same channel. It was from the head of digital forensics, a no-nonsense woman named Ria. Forensics has already analyzed the proxy file's metadata. The file is clean. No evidence of post-production editing. No compression artifacts inconsistent with the original camera format. The checksum provided by the subvendor for the proxy matches the file on our server. We are awaiting the original source file to confirm, but preliminary analysis indicates authenticity. This is not a fake. Margaret did not reply. Her theory had been publicly, clinically dismantled in less than 60 seconds by a superior authority. The community machine, when pointed in the right direction, was a brutally efficient truth detector. Then came the second wave, the press and the neighbors. The people in that auditorium were not just homeowners. They were the same people who ran the local Facebook groups and Nextdoor threads. They were live posting, filing breathless updates. The first headlines began to appear on my feed. They were brutal. Local news. HOA president caught on hot mic in bizarre act happy. Incident with executive meeting halted. Neighborhood blog. Chaos at Sunnyvale Meadows annual meeting as video appears to show president coercing female resident. Facebook group post. Already 1.2K likes. Gloria touts safety and respect seconds before damning hot mic video derails global live stream. My desk phone, which I hadn't used in years, began to ring. The caller ID showed it was the main switchboard. They were patching through the outside press calls and angry residents. It rang once, twice. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. I finally reached over and unplugged the cord from the wall jack. Silence. My role now was not to talk but to control the narrative by refusing to participate in it. When a direct email came in from a top local reporter asking for comment, I gave the only answer I would give all day. I typed a single sterile sentence. The association will issue a formal statement in due course. It was a gray wall of community speak, a shield of absolute neutrality. It gave them nothing, and in doing so it told them everything. This was being handled. This was not a panic. This was a procedure. A security guard appeared at the door of my booth. Ms. Voss, Mr. Vance has requested the original asset be delivered to the third-floor conference room. We have a forensics team waiting. It's on its way, I said calmly. The videographer is delivering it directly as we speak. My secure chat pinged. It was Noah. Delivery complete. Original file and card signed over to forensics. Checksums match proxy to 32 decimal points. It's a perfect mirror. My work is done. Lila, good luck. I closed the chat window. The final link in the chain of evidence was now locked in place. The truth was no longer an allegation. It was a verified, time-stamped, and cryptographically signed piece of association property. I leaned back in my chair for the first time all day and took a slow, deep breath. The storm was still raging. The posts were still flying. The talking heads on the local news were already speculating. Their voices a muted babble from a TV in the nearby lounge. But in here, in the quiet of my booth, a profound stillness had settled over me. The trembling I had lived with for years, the low-frequency tremor of constant fear and suppressed anger, was gone. It had been replaced by something solid, something immovable. It was the clear, sharp, and unforgiving line of a boundary, the line between what was acceptable and what was not. For 17 years she had blurred that line, moved it, erased it to suit her own needs. Today I had redrawn it in permanent ink in front of the entire neighborhood. There was no more running. There was no more hiding. There was only the line. And I was standing on the right side of it. An hour after the world went black, a summon came. Not an email or a call, but a junior board associate. A young man with wide, terrified eyes, who appeared at the door of my booth and delivered the message in a hushed whisper. Mr. Vance requests your presence. Third floor conference room. The walk was a journey through a ghost ship. The usually bustling corridors of the rec center were eerily quiet. People were clustered in small silent groups, looking at their phones. When they saw me approaching, they didn't whisper. They simply parted, their eyes averted, as if I were a harbinger of a fate they did not wish to catch. There was no solidarity, no condemnation, only fear. I was a known variable in an equation that had suddenly become terrifyingly unstable. The conference room on the third floor was encased in glass walls, a fishbowl suspended over the main atrium. Inside, the long black granite table reflected the gray afternoon sky. Arthur Vance sat at the head of the table. To his left were two men and a woman I recognized as the independent directors from the board's audit and governance committees. They were the association's ultimate arbiters, the ones who were insulated from internal politics, whose only legal duty was to the homeowners. Their faces were like granite. And at the far end of the table, isolated, sat Gloria. She was not in a power seat. She was simply in a chair. Her blazer was slightly loosened, the first crack in her immaculate armor. She watched me as I entered, and the look in her eyes was not one of a president or a stepmother. It was the raw feral glare of a cornered animal. The associate closed the door behind me, the soft click sealing us inside the transparent box. I did not wait to be addressed. I walked to the empty chair opposite Gloria and remained standing. She spoke first, her voice a low venomous rasp that cut through the funeral silence. "Are you satisfied?" she hissed across the polished table. "Are you happy now? You set all of this up just to ruin my reputation." I didn't answer her question. It was irrelevant. Instead, I opened the leather portfolio I was carrying. I took out a single sheet of paper and placed it in the center of the table, sliding it forward until it stopped in front of Arthur Vance. My movements were slow, deliberate, devoid of anger. "Sunnyvale Meadows HOA Code of Conduct," I said, my voice even and clear. "Policy 2.14, Paragraph 3. My finger pointed to the highlighted text. "Misconduct by a community officer while acting as a designated representative of the association constitutes a material breach and grounds for immediate removal." Gloria let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "Misconduct? I was coaching you. Something I've done 1,000 times. I was teaching you how to smile for a damn photograph. For the neighborhood." For the first time, Arthur Vance spoke. He didn't look at Gloria. His eyes were fixed on the document in front of him. What the forensics team saw, what the board saw, and what 200 homeowners saw was not coaching. Gloria. His voice was flat and heavy as lead. It was an act of physical and verbal coercion against a subordinate. You did it on association time, on association property, and it was captured as an official record. You did not just harm an employee. You took a lit torch to the association's brand, reputation, and homeowner value. On the record, Gloria's face flushed a deep mottled red. "This is a family matter. A misunderstanding." "This?" Arthur interrupted, finally lifting his gaze to meet Gloria's, "is a multi-million-dollar crisis, and you are its source." The room fell silent again. This was the moment. The community case was made. Now it was time for the motive. I reached into my portfolio again and took out my tablet. I swiped it on and placed it on the table, angled for the board members to see. On the screen was a high-resolution scan of a handwritten letter. The cursive elegant but shaky. It was dated a year ago, a birthday card from my mother. I didn't say anything. I just let them read the key line I had highlighted. "My dearest Lila, my only wish for you this year is that you find your own happiness. Don't let anyone, not her, not anyone, force you to act happy for their sake. You are stronger than you think. I believe in you. Love, Mom." It was not an accusation. It was a testament. Spoke of a pattern, of a history, of a prison built long before this morning. It explained everything without me having to utter a single emotional word. The woman on the board, a stern-faced director named Alara Vance, finally spoke, her voice cutting and precise. She looked at me, not with sympathy but with the incisive gaze of an auditor. Ms. Boss, this letter suggests a history. Was this morning's incident an isolated event, or have there been other complaints? This was the final move. 6 months ago, I said, my voice steady, I filed a formal complaint with the Compliance Committee regarding the President's pattern of claiming credit for my department's work and creating a hostile environment during executive meetings. I slid another document across the table. This is the compliance report. Case number 7B-441. As you can see on the final page, the conclusion was that it was a misunderstanding of management styles, and the case was closed with no action taken. The air went out of the room. I had not just proven a pattern of behavior in Gloria. I had proven a pattern of institutional failure. I had shown them that I had played by their rules and their rules had failed to protect me, and by extension the entire association. My actions at the annual meeting were no longer just an act of revenge. They were the last resort of a system that had refused to police itself. That was the end. There was no more debate. Arthur Vance slid a set of documents in front of the 3 directors. The only sound in the glass room was the quiet, dry scratch of several expensive pens moving across heavy paper. It was the sound of a presidency, of an entire era, being signed away. When they were finished, Arthur stacked the papers neatly. He looked at Gloria, his face devoid of all expression. Gloria, effective immediately, you are suspended from your duties as president and as a volunteer of Sunnyvale Meadows HOA. Your access card and all association-issued devices are to be surrendered to security. Your network access has been terminated. A formal investigation led by outside counsel will commence within the hour. He then turned his gaze to me. Ms. Boss, effective immediately, you are granted provisional authority for all internal and external communications regarding this matter. Nothing goes out without your final sign-off. A statement is to be drafted for the homeowners within the next 30 minutes. Gloria pushed her chair back, the sound scraping harshly against the floor. She stood up slowly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. She had nothing left to say. There were no cameras, no audience to perform for, no narrative left to spin. She stood there, a woman in an expensive blazer trapped in a glass box. I glanced at the side of her jacket, at the polished silver HOA pin on her lapel. In its convex surface, I could see a tiny distorted reflection of the conference room window and the gray indifferent sky beyond. For the first time in her life, Gloria Sutter had no stage. The executive session of the independent board held in the immediate grim aftermath of our meeting was brutally efficient. There was no lengthy debate, no hand-wringing. The evidence was absolute. The liability was catastrophic. The decision was unanimous. A notification from Arthur Vance's office appeared on my tablet. Its text as cold and final as a tombstone. On the record, by a unanimous vote of the independent directors, Gloria Sutter has been removed from the position of president of Sunnyvale Meadows HOA. Effective immediately, her volunteer status has been terminated for cause. It was over. The official record now reflected reality. My first act with my newly confirmed authority was not to celebrate. It was to communicate. I turned to a clean document on my screen and typed. I did not labor over the words. The truth I had learned required very little adornment. The statement was 2 sentences long. It was the most powerful thing I had ever written. For immediate release, Sunnyvale Meadows HOA confirms a material breach of the association's code of conduct by its former president. We have launched a comprehensive third-party review of our community culture to ensure the safety and respect of all homeowners. I attached my digital signature, the cursor blinking once before I clicked approve for distribution. The statement was instantly released onto the major neighborhood apps and the local news wires. A single drop of disinfectant into a poison well. It was not an apology. It was a promise. It was the first honest sentence the association had spoken in years. I stood up and gathered my things, my movements unhurried. As I walked toward the door of the conference room, I saw a familiar figure in the atrium below. It was Noah Pike. He was standing near the main entrance, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, looking up at the glass box where I had been. He wasn't leaving. He was waiting to see the end of the story he had helped capture. Our eyes met through the expanse of glass and air. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply gave me a single slow nod. I returned it. It was a silent conversation between two people who had handled a piece of volatile truth and placed it exactly where it needed to go. The evidence had done its work. The rest was just fallout. Before leaving the room, I paused. On the wall near the door was a small black dome, an internal security camera. For years I had walked under its unblinking eye, feeling watched, monitored, a component of the suburban machine. Now I saw it differently. It was just a lens, an impartial observer. Slowly I reached up and unclipped the ID badge from my blazer. It was a piece of plastic, but it felt heavy. It read Lila Voss, Head of Community Communications, a title that had defined me, a role that had been both my cage and my weapon. I held it in my hand and looked directly up into the dark lens of the camera. I didn't know who, if anyone, was watching the monitor on the other end. It didn't matter. I was speaking to the permanent record, to the soul of the neighborhood itself. "We don't act happy," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "We choose the truth." I placed the badge on the edge of the granite table. A final offering. Then I turned and walked to the door. I placed my hand on the cool steel handle and took one last steadying breath. I could hear it through the thick glass. A low, chaotic rumble from the hallway. The sound of the world waiting. I opened the door. The sound that hit me was a physical force. A wall of noise and light. 100 camera flashes went off at once. A blinding, instantaneous storm of white light that erased the world for a microsecond. The rapid-fire clicking of shutters was like a hailstorm of tiny hammers. Reporters and neighbors surged forward, a tangled thicket of microphones and outstretched arms. Their shouted questions colliding into an unintelligible roar. "Ms. Voss, what's your comment? Is it true? Sutter has been removed. Who's in charge of Sunnyvale Meadows now? Were you the one in the video?" I did not flinch. I did not shield my eyes. I simply stood in the doorway, letting the wave break against me. The intense white-hot light of the camera strobes fell across my face, my blazer, my hands. It illuminated the place on my wrist where a bruise had once been. My hand was perfectly still. I took the first step out of the conference room and into the light. And just like that, the perfect neighborhood would never be the same again.